In this video, we're going to be creating the enum that is going to be used in our weapon class that will kind of help us know which weapon is in our hands. And that's going to be used for things, well, primarily to determine what animations to play in our animation blueprint. And, well, that's really pretty much it. So that way we're playing the correct weapon animation. So we have a pistol in hand, for the 1911, for example. We'll play the animations for the 1911, and same thing for our third person blueprint, animation blueprint. The others will see us holding and playing the animations for the 1911. And if we switch to the M1 carbine, it's going to be the same thing. They'll see us holding the M1 carbine and playing the animations for, what gun is in our hands. So in order to begin, we're going to go to our weapon base.h, and right above our weapons U class, we're going to create an enum. So we've already actually created one called eHitLocation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply copy, paste this right above our U class and remove all of them except for one. Now I'm going to go ahead and change the name to eWeapon ID, and let's give it a weapon name. Well, for starters, let's see. Let's do 1911 and give it the name 1911 as well. All right, apparently we can't set its variable name. Let's see. I'm going to do Colt 1911. Then I'm going to do a comma down on a new line. I'm going to copy and paste it again, and I'm going to change it to M1 carbine, like so. So now we have that, and what we need to do is we need to pretty much create a U property. So I'm going to copy this property line here. I'm going to do it right under weapon mesh, and it's going to be a kind of what's going to dictate what weapon this is. So we're going to use it in our switch statement that's going to be playing inside of our animation blueprint, and that'll start to make sense later on, but I'll show you what I mean here in a bit. So we have eWeapon ID. So let's do t enum as byte. The enum is eWeapon ID. Let's call this one weapon ID. Now we just need to create a getter function to get that weapon ID. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. Ignore this. This is now blueprint callable. That was just so I could show the reloading. And same thing with the function actually. So we're going to do a U function. It's going to be blueprint callable. And what's going to return is the t enum as byte. Oops. E weapon ID. And let's call it get weapon ID. Now we're going to press Alt Enter, create the implementation, and all it's going to return is weapon ID. Ignore that, like so. I'm going to go ahead and start the compile. So what we've done is we've created a enum that currently has two, one for the 1911 and one for the M1 carbine that we imported in the last video. Then we have a U property variable that we can assign and set up inside the engine, which I need to close, called weapon ID. So for our 1911, we're going to set weapon ID to equal Colt 1911. For the M1 carbine, we're going to set it to be equal to the M1 carbine. Then if we scroll down, we have a getter function that simply is going to return our weapon ID, and that's all. Oops. Once this is finished compiling, I'll show you how this is going to be used in our animation blueprint. Let's relaunch it. And the first thing we're going to open up is the weapon, or the 1911 blueprint, as well as our, what do you call it? The first person arms blueprint. I'm going to go to weapons, 1911, BP 1911, and character, FPS, arms, and our animation blueprint. So first in our 1911, we have here weapon ID, we see 1911 and M1 carbine. So that's set up how we want. And for fire animation, I need to reset that to the 1911 fire, sorry. And now back in our arms animation blueprint, we go back to the animation graph. What we can do is we can create a type in blend, Then we'll have blend poses. If we scroll through, we'll see blend poses, E weapon ID. We press enter on that, and we have two default pose. So what we can do is if you right click on it, you'll see add pin for element. Well, we have two pins, the 1911 and the M1 carbine. So we're going to start with the 1911, like so. And what we're going to do is where we have this slot, we're going to drag out and drag it into the 1911 pose. And then drag out to the output pose and compile and save. So the note here is because the default pose is just not being touched, but that's not a big deal. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to create a variable that is going to hold what weapon ID we're on. So down here under variables, let's create a new one. Let's call this one current weapon ID. And type's going to be E weapon ID. We just drag off, do get, and plug it in. Go back to the event graph. Ignore that. Again, that was for displaying the animations. So we have our current weapon ID. So let's drag out and do a set, but we need to get our weapon. So we have our character. Let's do get weapon, or let's see, current weapon. So we have call function get current weapon. Let's do a valid. So if it's valid, what we're going to do is we're going to drag off the weapon. We're going to do get weapon ID, like so, and just plug them in. So that should help us figure out whether or not we are playing something like well, for instance, if it's invalid, we could set it to a knife, meaning we don't have a weapon or something like that. Or if it's for example, if it's the M1 carbine, we would just drag it into the M1 carbine, that kind of thing. But currently we only have the 1911 weapon set up, so I'll leave it as that. Let's just make sure everything still works, which it does. We're still playing the firing animations. I need to add that socket back because as you can see, the shot's going straight left. But yeah, currently everything seems to be working as fine. Well, just like before. And in the next video, what we're going to do is add the M1 carbine. So we're going to set that up. First off, let me actually rename this from new state machine to Colt 1911, so it's clear. So now we have the base set up. We're going to work on the one carbine in the next video and set that up. So I will see you then.